Hey guys, weary traveller, and welcome to this cozy corner of history. Tonight we'll touch the grim life of people in the Middle Ages, where hunger, cold, and disease always lurk, turning each day of existence into a survival challenge. Honestly, you wouldn't survive even a single day here. Before our journey back in time begins, I truly want to know, where are you watching from in the world? And what time is it where you are? It's wonderful that among so many countries, we can meet here together exploring a past full of mysteries. So if you're passionate about stories like this, feel free to leave a comment, share where you're from and how you feel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly feel this journey is worth it. And now, choose a truly comfortable space for yourself. Set aside the present for a moment. And congratulations! You just opened your eyes after a long night in the year 1333, in a tiny village somewhere in Europe. The good news is, you're still alive. The bad news? Everything around you is quietly working against you. First, feel your bed. Don't imagine a soft mattress with feather stuffing or fluffy pillows. In reality, it's nothing more than a pile of rotting straw, pressed down into a crude mattress. This straw was once cow feed, later gathered up and covered with a bit of coarse linen. After the damp winter it's soaked through, covered in mold, and what lies beneath your back smells no different from a small compost pit. Inside every stalk of straw is a thriving kingdom. Fleas, lice, ticks crawling all over. They don't just live with you, they feed on you every night, leaving dozens of bites that you scratch until they bleed. Your only blanket is an old piece of wool, rough and heavy, weighed down with layers of grime, sweat, and grease from months of use. People say such a blanket could weigh as much as a small calf. You clutch it not because it's comfortable, but because, without it, the cold slicing through the gaps of your wooden hut would freeze you solid overnight. Now you hear the church bells ringing in the distance. That's the alarm clock of the Middle Ages. No electronic buzzers, no artificial sunlight in your bedroom, just that metallic clang echoing across the village, dragging everyone out of their heavy sleep. The sound is cold, a reminder that another workday begins, no matter how sore your body feels. You try to stretch your back. Mistake. Instantly, your spine cracks like an old wooden hinge. Your shoulders are stiff, your knees grind like a sack of gravel. You're only 22 years old, but in this era, that's practically middle-aged. Your body is already worn down like a 40-year-old today. As you crawl up, your feet touch the ground, and you regret it instantly. The floor isn't stone, nor wood planks. It's packed dirt, mixed with dried animal dung, rainwater leaking from the thatched roof, and streaks of filth you'd rather not name. It rained last night, so the ground is soaked, icy. Your bare feet sink into the thick mud, and in that moment, you know you've become part of the house's ecosystem. Dirt, water, dung, and human. Lift your head and look around. This is your home, a tiny wooden hut, walls sealed with clay and straw. The roof is thatched, yellowing, patched with branches where holes had opened. No windows, no shutters, only thin beams of light slicing through the cracks, like blades across the clay walls. There's just one room for everyone. You, your parents, siblings, sometimes even relatives lodging here. Privacy doesn't exist. Children cry, adults cough, roosters crow, cows bellow. It's a chaotic symphony long before the sun even rises. In a corner, two hens waddle about, leaving droppings across the dirt floor. Nobody bothers to clean it. A goat pokes its head from a pen made of stakes, bleating loudly. Its pungent smell mixes with the sweat, the mouldy blanket, the sour beer fermenting in a jug, and the rot of the thatch above. You take a breath and realize this is the morning smell of the Middle Ages. On the clay wall, household tools hang in disorder. A rusty sickle, a wooden plough, a few dented pots, and a sack of seeds for the next crop. They are both tools and the family's only wealth. No cupboards, no shelves, nothing stored away. Everything hangs in plain sight, covered in dust. Beside you, your family stirs awake. No one has their own bed. Everyone piles onto the same heap of straw, divided only by logs pretending to mark boundaries. Whenever someone rolls over, the straw rustles, fleas leap, and everyone wakes together. You can't fake sleep. You can't hide. In this time, being alone is a luxury. You run your hand over your face, skin cracked from cold winds, scratched raw from flea bites. Your hair is tangled, greasy from weeks without washing. There are no combs. Shampoo hasn't been invented. If you want to untangle it, you dip your hands into the murky cold water in a clay jar, then claw through the mess. But the jar is nearly empty, and that water might need to be saved for cooking the morning pottage. Food before cleanliness, that's the rule. You hear a rattling at the door. Not a visitor, just the icy wind slipping through the gaps. The thatch roof shivers. Bits of straw fall onto the floor, mixing with dust and cobwebs. A mouse darts across the corner, squeaking softly. No one bothers to catch it. Mice are permanent, neighbours here. You glance at your mother. She's already up, lighting a fire with damp sticks. Smoke rises, stings your eyes, and spreads through the house with no chimney to escape. You cough violently. The smoke mingles with the stink of dung and the musty straw into a thick, suffocating stew that clings to your lungs. Yet, it's the familiar smell without it. You'd feel something was missing. The house glows only from the flickering fire. Shadows dance on, the clay walls twisted and trembling. In that light, you see long cracks running across the wall where winter winds slip in and summer insects creep through. That is your morning, the morning of a medieval peasant. No gentle alarms, no golden curtains, no soft mattresses. Only the cold clang of church bells like a blade, the icy dirt floor, and a cramped room where life and filth are forever entangled. You crawl up, barely rubbing your eyes, when your body reminds you of an urgent need. Go to the bathroom. And this is the moment you realize you miss modern toilets more than anything else in life. Because here in the year 1333 toilets don't exist. No shiny porcelain bowl, no flush handle, not even a proper dugout pit. What you have is a wooden bucket sitting behind the house, always overflowing. People call it the night soil bucket. And in the morning, it's the very first thing that greets you. You step outside barefoot. The ground is still muddy from last night's rain. Chicken droppings, goat dung, and dirty water blending into a sticky film clinging to your heels. With no shoes, you trudge along to the back of the house. The wooden bucket sits there, open-mouthed, stench blasting straight into your nose. The smell is so strong you can almost taste it in your throat. Foul, sour, pungent, like some horrific soup even demons wouldn't dare touch. You sit down. No lid, no seat, just a wobbly plank. Before you, a few flies buzz, feasting on the rim. A horse nearby snorts, seemingly offended by the stink too. You hold your breath, grimace, and do what you must. Finished, you grab a wooden scoop and toss it all into the drainage ditch running through the village road. And that's it. Your waste, along with hundreds of others, instantly turns the street into a brown river, flowing straight out the village gate. If you're observant, you'll notice housewives opening their windows, tipping buckets out and shouting, "Guadeloupe," an old French phrase meaning, "Watch out below." But honestly, nobody dodges in time. Market goers, children playing, even dogs and cats, everyone gets splashed in what people just dumped. And you, stepping out of your home, have already put your foot right into it. If you're lucky enough to live in a city with public latrines, it's no better. Just a long wooden bench with round holes, where you sit shoulder to shoulder with 10 strangers, all doing business together. No dividers, no privacy, no fragrance. Smoke, stench, gagging sounds mixed with casual chatter. If the wind blows that day, you'll wish you'd never been born. And if you're a noble living in a castle, congratulations, your toilet is slightly fancier. It even has a polite name, the garderobe, literally, the clothes room. In reality, it's just a hole in the wall, dropping waste straight into the moat below. Convenient idea, with one fatal flaw. Enemies sometimes climbed into castles through that very hole. Yes, you heard right. Attackers once invaded through the sewer. Toilet paper? Forget it. Medieval people never heard of it. Instead, you had creative solutions. A handful of dry grass, some leaves, a scrap of cloth, even a smooth stone. If your family was wealthy, maybe an old piece of wool. But most of the time, people used nothing at all. That's right, when you're done, you just stand up and walk away, leaving everything for your hands and the wind to deal with. And maybe that's why handshakes were never popular in this era. Done with that business, you might think of washing your face or brushing your teeth. But sadly, here, nobody believes cleanliness matters. Medieval folks thought bathing too often made the body weak, opened the pores, and let disease in, so the layers of dust, mud, and sweat on your skin weren't seen as filth. They were considered a natural shield. In the corner of the house, there's a barrel of rainwater. The surface is coated with green moss, a few bugs dancing on top, and a slimy film spread across it. You dip your hands in and splash your face. The icy water shocks you awake, but at the same time, you wonder, did you just rub bacteria, worms, and bird droppings into your skin? The answer, yes, you did. And your teeth? No toothpaste, no toothbrush. Sometimes you might chew on a twig or rinse with diluted vinegar, but most of the time, you just leave it. The result? By age 25, your smile looks like something out of a crypt. Black, decayed, wobbly teeth, inflamed gums. Every bite of rock-hard bread risks knocking one out. If you get a toothache, your only option is the barber. Yes, the barber also doubles as the dentist. He'll shove a crude iron plier into your mouth, yank in one brutal motion, no anesthesia, no painkillers. You'll scream, blood will gush, and he'll toss the tooth onto the floor before cutting someone else's hair. And if that wound gets infected, sorry, you die from a tooth. One more thing, your breath. Everyone here has bad breath. From nobles to peasants, all reek of sour ale, garlic, and rotting teeth. When people lean away as you speak, it's not because they dislike you, it's because they smell just as bad. You glance around, watching your family start their day. Everyone scratching lice and fleas crawling on their scalps, behind ears, under armpits. Nobody cares. Scratching is as natural as breathing. Sometimes you spot an entire colony of lice thriving on your sister's hair, and she just sits calmly braiding flax. And you, after enduring your morning ritual sitting on a wooden bucket, splashing filthy rainwater on your face, chewing a twig to dull the ache in your teeth, and scratching until you bleed, are finally considered clean enough to begin a new day. You step away from the reeking wooden bucket, face still dripping with that murky rainwater. Your stomach begins to growl, not because you're dreaming of a feast, but simply because since yesterday you've had nothing but a chunk of bread as hard as stone. Breakfast in the Middle Ages didn't have the concept of delicious. It had only one purpose, to keep you from starving to death. Your mother lifts the old iron pot sitting on the hearth. Inside, a lumpy mixture bubbles away. People call it pottage, the national dish of medieval times. Don't imagine it like hot soup or nourishing porridge. In reality, it's just whatever scraps are left from the past few days. A few shriveled carrots, some grains, a handful of dried beans, all boiled down into a grey, pasty mush. Yesterday there were potatoes. Toss them in. The day before, a bit of cabbage. Throw that in too. No vegetables left. Then weeds, roots, even onion peels won't go to waste. Pottage has no recipe, it's pure survival. If yesterday there was a scrap of fatty meat, today the pot still has a slick film of grease floating on top, a rare luxury. You stare at the pot, wondering, how many days has this been cooking? In the Middle Ages, the fire never goes out, and the pottage pot is never washed clean. It's just reheated over and over, with new ingredients piled onto old remains. People joked, you might be eating vegetables from last season. Your mother scoops some into a wooden bowl. No stainless steel spoons, no porcelain. Just a rough, cracked bowl blackened with smoke. You take it and inhale. The smell is hard to describe. Earthy, sour, faintly mouldy. You tell yourself it's the scent of traditional flavor. You put the wooden spoon, probably shared by the whole family, into your mouth. Immediately, your teeth ache from half-cooked grains. A mushy carrot collapses, releasing the bitterness of dirt still clinging to it. You chew, your tongue rubbing against a cracked tooth, blood seeping out. But you keep going because without this, you won't have the strength to pick up a hoe. After the pottage, you reach for bread. Forget fluffy French loaves or soft white sandwich bread. This is black bread, made of coarse barley or oats. The crust is as hard as stone, the inside dense and black as soil. Sometimes, to stretch the flour, people mixed in sawdust or bark, which means every bite feels like chewing wood. You tap the bread on the table. It clunks like a brick. To eat it, you soak it in the pottage until it softens. Even then, your teeth grind and crack, ready to snap at any moment. Water? Don't even think of clean water. The village well is rarely clear, full of waste, animal carcasses and insects. Drinking straight from it is suicide, so you and the whole village drink weak beer instead. Yes, from children to adults, everyone starts the day with a cup of watery ale. Don't picture golden lager in a glass mug. This is cloudy liquid, lightly fermented, sour and bland. But at least it's safer than water. The yeast kills some of the bacteria. You lift the wooden cup, take a sip, and feel your throat burn. Children drink it too, and nobody finds that odd. If your family is poor, and you are, then breakfast ends there. One bowl of mushy pottage, a chunk of rock-hard bread, and a gulp of weak beer. If you're luckier, say, the family just killed a sick chicken, today's pottage might have scraps of meat. But remember, meat is rare. You might only eat it a few times a year, usually during religious festivals, weddings, or funerals. Once in a while, if your father catches a rabbit, breakfast feels grand, a tiny piece of meat tossed into the pot, making the whole family inhale as though heaven itself had blessed them. But most of the time, meat is something you only see on the Lord's or the priest's table. Sometimes, meals are more dangerous than life-saving. Mouldy bread could be infected with ergot, a toxic fungus that causes hallucinations, convulsions, even death. Medieval people didn't know the reason. They thought it was the hand of the devil. And you unlucky enough could eat a bite, then collapse, shaking, screaming, and die on the cold ground. You look around the table. Your father slurps pottage by hand, blowing on it noisily. Your sister bites bread with teeth ready to fall out. Your mother divides portions, keeping the smallest piece for herself. The family sits in silence. No chatter, no laughter. Eating here isn't pleasure. It's a battle, a negotiation with hunger. You swallow the last bite. Wipe your mouth on your sleeve stained dark with grime. No napkins, no clean utensils. Just clothes and rough hands. And with that, your breakfast is over. Your stomach stops growling, but the heaviness remains. You've just swallowed dirt, mold and bacteria, but that's normal. You know, tomorrow, the next day, next week, breakfast will look exactly the same. A pot of mushy pottage, a piece of hard bread, a gulp of weak ale. Day after day, year after year. You scoop up the last of the pottage from your wooden bowl, and now it's time to think about clothes for the fields. But in your world, the idea of a wardrobe doesn't exist. There's no choice of what to wear this morning, or later today, or this season. You have one outfit, and you wear it all year until it falls apart or rots right off your body. It's a tunic, knee-length, made of coarse wool. Not soft, not warm, on the contrary. It's itchy, scratching your skin like 1,000 tiny needles. After months, it's soaked with sweat, mud, and smoke from the hearth. Its original colour was probably light brown, but now it's a blotchy grey-black, like rotting animal hide. You bend down and lift it off the wooden peg near the fire. It's heavy, damp from last night's rain seeping through the thatch. Pulling it over your head feels like draping a dead sheep across your shoulders. Cold, wet, and reeking so badly you want to gag. But that's all you've got. Pants? A pair of linen trousers, patched and repatched. The legs flare and fray like burnt grass. With every step, the seams rip a little more, and you know one day soon they'll split wide open. But there's nothing else to replace them. If you're lucky, you might wrap some extra cloth around your legs for warmth, called leg wraps. That's it. Wool socks? Forget it. Leather shoes? Luxury. Your feet are bare, calloused, cracked, caked in mud. In winter, they turn purple, frozen stiff. In summer, they burn raw, sticky with sap and animal dung. Once in a while you might find a pair of discarded soldiers' sandals, but the soles are so thin, sharp rocks pierce through like needles. So going barefoot is just life. You bend down, splash a handful of dirty water from a bucket on your face. But bathing? Don't dream of it. Medieval people believed bathing was dangerous. They thought hot water opened the pores, letting in evil vapours and disease. Cold water, they feared, shut the breath and could kill you instantly. The result? People bathed, maybe once every few months, sometimes only once a year. Some went their entire lives with just a handful of baths, usually during festivals. Instead, they covered smells with scents. but perfumes were rare. Women sometimes tucked dried flowers in their hair. Nobles used oils and herbs. You, a poor peasant, had nothing. You step outside with the natural smell of sweat, dung, smoke, and mildew. You scratch your head. Instantly, a few lice tumble onto your tunic. They've lived in your hair forever, and you've stopped caring. The whole village has. Children sit picking lice off each other, popping them with a little crack that sounds almost fun. Adults treat it like daily routine, no different than eating. Sometimes in the evening, families gather around the fire, picking lice off each other as a form of entertainment. Beards aren't any better. Razors are rare, sharp ones even rarer. Most men wear scruffy beards matted with grease and dust. If you want tidying up, you go to the barber, who is also the village doctor, dentist, and sometimes even the sorcerer. He has a rusty blade, and every shave slices your skin like butchery. You might look cleaner afterward, but your face will be covered in cuts, bleeding, and swollen. Body odor here isn't shameful, it's normal. You stink, your neighbors stink, everyone stinks. People even tell each other apart by scent. Peasants reek of grass, mud, and dung. Nobles of horses, fine wool, and sometimes perfume. Priests of communion, wine, and candle smoke. And you reek of survival. You glance at your hands. Nails long, black with dirt and soot. No soap, no clippers. If you want them shorter, you scrape them with a dull knife. But mostly, no one bothers. Dirt under the nails even helps hide blood from scratching yourself raw. In your tunic pocket, you keep a rag. Not for your face, for your nose. Every time you blow, you shove it back in your pocket. Never washed, never replaced. After a few weeks, it stiffens like dried leather. You keep using it anyway, because it's all you've got. If you're a woman, hygiene is even harsher. Menstruation has no pads, no paper, just rags, rinsed in dirty water, reused again and again. Infections are common. The smell of blood mixes with sweat, but nobody notices. It's too universal. You pull your wool tunic tight, trying to cover the holes. Outside, the wind cuts through the valley, freezing to the bone. But you have to go. You are now as clean as medieval standards allow. Face damp with rainwater, hair crawling with lice, teeth loose, tunic damp and mouldy, bare feet cracked. And that's good enough to step into the fields, blending into the crowd of peasants, each one just like you. You've finished your one soggy bowl of pottage, washed it down with a sip of weak ale, pulled on the only set of clothes you own, and now it's time to start the day. Or more accurately, another long, endless day. No different from yesterday, and exactly the same as tomorrow. You step barefoot out of your hut. The whole village is waking under the pale light of dawn. Fog blankets everything, cold enough to slice the skin. The path ahead isn't paved stone, it's a muddy track, churned with human waste, animal dung, and trash. Children scurry about, scratching lice as they chew on scraps of stale bread. An old woman hauls a bucket of waste to the ditch, the splash echoing in the quiet morning. Chickens, dogs, pigs, and geese run wild, mixing into one chaotic mess. And you, a young peasant, walk into it as if it's the most normal thing in the world. Far off, the church bell tolls. It's not just a call to prayer, it's an order. Get to the fields. If you're late, the Lord's overseer will take note, and the punishment could be a lash, a fine, or losing your food ration. Nobody dares disobey. You heft a wooden plough onto your shoulder, its tip capped with rusty iron. The tool is so crude you need every ounce of strength and a half-starved ox to drag it forward. No machines, no iron wheels, no modern invention, just sweat and blood. At the fields, you look out over the land. Don't picture a pretty painting. The soil is hard, strewn with rocks and weeds. Many plots were hacked out of forest, and the ground is stubborn as stone. To plough even a small patch, you'll walk back and forth dozens of times, your shoulders numb, your back screaming. Every stroke of the plough is a battle. Clods of dirt fly into your face, mud spatters into your mouth. The ox wheezes, eyes bloodshot. You shout at it, whip it, drag the plough again. The sun creeps up, and you know, today will be another sentence of hard labour. After a few hours, your stomach growls again. Break time, but don't expect a good lunch. You untie the cloth bag at your hip. Inside, only a hunk of black bread, rock hard since morning, with a shriveled onion or turnip. That's it. You chew slowly, tears springing. Not from emotion, but from the sting of the onion. Your mouth is dry. You take a sip of weak ale from a goatskin flask. It quenches nothing. The nearby well is no cleaner, full of filth. You sigh and go back to the plough. Beside you, fellow peasants do the same: bread, onions, ale. No complaints, no daydreams. They know complaining doesn't make the bread any softer. By midday, the sun blazes. Sweat runs down your body. No light shirts, no wide hats, only that heavy wool tunic, clinging like a wet blanket, itching, suffocating. Your hands blister, skin torn open. Mud grinds into the wounds, burning sharp. No bandages, no antiseptic. A small cut here can fester, swell, and kill you with fever in days. But you don't have time to think about death. The plough must move, the soil must turn. If you don't sow seed, your family starves in winter, and starvation comes faster than disease. On the ridge, an overseer rides past on horseback. Cloak on his shoulders, whip in hand. He doesn't plough, he doesn't sow, but he speaks for the Lord, the man who owns the land you're breaking. When he passes, everyone bows their head. You know the truth. No matter how hard you work, most of the harvest belongs to the Lord. Then the church takes its tithe. Then the soldiers take theirs. What's left barely keeps your family alive. Sometimes you wonder, why do I work like a beast, yet own nothing? But then you look around. Everyone's the same. Your father, your grandfather, your ancestors. And your children will be too. No one escapes the cycle. A scream cuts through the fields. On the next plot, a peasant's leg has been slashed open by a plough blade kicked back. Blood gushes, soaking the dirt red. Others rush over, tying rags around the wound. No hospital, no medicine. Just a prayer that the bleeding stops and rot doesn't set in. You shiver. Accidents like this aren't rare. A slip into a ditch, a kick from an ox, and a man could die right there in the mud. Death is never. Far it lurks, waiting. The sun dips, shadows stretch. Still you plough, arms shaking, back bent, eyes stinging from the smoke of burning straw nearby. Your stomach growls again, but there's nothing left to eat. You swallow hard, thinking of dinner, another thin pottage and stale bread. Every step feels heavier, but you can't stop. Stop, and the field won't be ready. If the field isn't ready, your family starves. And if not starvation, the Lord will still strip you of what's yours. The cycle tightens around you like invisible chains. Finally, the church bell tolls again, ending the day. You drop the plough, back so sore you can't stand straight. Your hands are swollen, your feet cracked and bleeding. Your clothes cling, heavy as stone. You trudge back to the village. The path is muddier now, churned by hundreds of feet. Smoke rises from the huts, the smell of pottage thick in the air again. You sigh, knowing tonight's meal will be the same as breakfast. But at least you've survived another day. And in the Middle Ages, survival is the only victory you can hope for. You think hard labor is enough to kill you? No, the real enemy is the weather. Something you can't predict, can't bargain with, and that never stands on your side. Picture a winter morning. You don't wake because of the church bells, but because the cold pierces straight through your bones. The one wool blanket has frozen stiff like a wet sheet of ice. Every breath escapes in a puff of white smoke. You curl up, but you know you still have to leave the bed. The fields won't wait, the livestock won't feed themselves, and the firewood is almost gone. Outside, frost coats the thatched roofs. The village path has turned into a slippery mirror of ice. Your toes crack, bleed, and go numb until you can't feel them. Every step feels like tiny bones splintering under your weight. The grain stores run low. The pottage becomes so thin it's little more than warm water with a few floating. Grains. Meat? A luxury long gone weeks ago. You look at your livestock, each one a bony skeleton. If they die, you lose both ploughing power and milk. If you slaughter them, you'll eat for a few days, but come spring, you'll have nothing left to farm with. Nature's cruel gamble. Do you eat to survive today, or starve now so you might have a chance tomorrow? The cold doesn't only kill with hunger, it kills with sickness. Your lungs seize, coughing all night. Children burn with fever. The elderly convulse and fade away. A harsh winter can wipe out an entire village. And you understand, winter is death's invisible blade. You think summer is kinder? Try standing in the fields from sunrise to dusk, the sun baking everything into an oven. No wide-brimmed hats, no cool water, just that heavy wool tunic sucking in sweat. Sweat streams down, soaking wounds, stinging like salt. The fields crack dry, soil hard as stone. Seeds won't sprout. All your labor turns to nothing. You look to the sky, praying for rain. But when it comes, it's no gentle shower, it's a storm. Winds whip, black clouds roll. Before you gather the straw, thunder splits the sky. The whole village runs out, trying to hold on to every bundle of grain, every roof thatch. But it's useless. One summer storm can wipe out an entire harvest in hours. Lightning strikes the church, turning the bell tower into a charred wreck. Rain crashes down, washing seeds away, flooding the fields. The next day, you stand in the muck, staring at ruined crops. Your heart sinks, you have nothing to eat, nothing to pay in tax. The Lord doesn't care about storms, he only cares about your yield. This year, floods. Next year, drought. Rivers rise, sweeping away cattle, children. People drown, fields turn to swamps. The whole village gnaws bark and leaves to stay alive. The next year, the sun scorches. The earth splits. You dig deep, searching for drops of foul water for the animals. Pottage becomes just boiling water, with a few weeds. Children scream from hunger. The elderly quietly die. You look at the sky, feeling like an ant crushed beneath the god's heel. Even when the weather is gentle, the world around you, never island wells, are polluted, full of bacteria. You drink, and days later your stomach cramps, diarrhea drains your strength. Rats scurry everywhere, carrying fleas, the same ones that will unleash the Black Death in the century to come. Flies swarm, landing on food and open wounds alike. You don't know clean air. Smoke from damp wood fills your lungs, making you cough all day. Spring brings pollen and mold that choke many to death, with no medicine to save them. Autumn drags in long, wet fogs, spreading rheumatism through the village. The world around you isn't Mother Nature. It's a giant jailer, tightening its chains around your neck day by day, season by season, year after year. You watch the cycle of the 4 seasons. Winter's death, spring's damp, summer's fire, autumn's gloom. Each season with its own way of torturing you. And you, a medieval peasant, have no choice but to endure. You can fight a lord with revolt, you can dodge the church's tithe, but you can never fight the weather. Nature is the invisible enemy, the silent executioner. It doesn't care about your suffering. It only turns, indifferent, grinding down both the weak and the strong. And you, trapped in that merciless cycle, are left with one hope only: to survive until the next season, just to continue the endless loop. If nature is the invisible enemy outside, then the church and society are the invisible chains binding you from within. You can hide from a storm by crawling into a cellar. You can survive famine by chewing bark. But you cannot escape God, at least not in the way your village, and all of medieval Europe, believed. Every Sunday morning, the church bells ring, pulling you away from the fields. You drag yourself into the church, the biggest stone building in the village, towering over everything else, as if crushing you by its very presence. Inside, thin beams of light cut through dust. Incense chokes the air. The priest stands on the pulpit, his voice booming in Latin. You don't understand most of it, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the message. You are a sinner. If you don't obey, you will burn in hell. You glance up at the wall painting of Judgment Day, flames roaring, demons gouging eyes, souls screaming. And you realize, you don't just fear winter. You don't just fear hunger. You must also fear eternal damnation. You think holy days are times of rest? Wrong. Holy days mean mandatory rituals. Confession, communion, fasting, abstaining from meat. If you don't comply, the whole village points fingers, the priest curses you from the pulpit, and the Lord may punish you. Even when you're exhausted after a week of ploughing, you still kneel for hours on cold stone floors. Your knees bleed, your back bends, but you dare not leave. Because if you do, people will see you as defying God. And in this world, to defy God is to defy society itself. It's not only labour, you must also pay 1/10 of your income to the church. the tithe. Even if the harvest fails, even if your family eats weeds to survive, the church still takes its share first. You look at your emaciated ox, the only one left to pull the plough. The priest knocks on your door, demanding milk, meat, or grain. You know that if you refuse, you'll be branded a blasphemer, and no one in the village will dare help you. So you hand it over. Your children starve. But your soul, so the priest says, will be saved. You live in a society where law doesn't protect. It threatens. The rich, the nobles, the lord, they are the law. Steal a loaf of bread, you could lose an ear, a hand, or hang at the village gate. But if the Lord takes your wife, no one resists. If the priest beats the villagers, people still bow. Justice doesn't exist, at least not for you, a poor peasant. If you are a man, you bear the weight of fields, taxes, and the church. But if you are a woman, the chains are twice as heavy. You are married off at 12 or 13, without choice. You give birth nearly every year, often dying on the bed from blood loss. If you are strong, if you speak against men, if you act outside the norm, people may call you a witch. And the punishment for witches? Burning alive in the town square before the entire village. You don't just fear hell after death, you fear hell in daily life. The medieval church and society didn't need iron chains. They had fear to bind you, fear of hunger, fear of disease, fear of storms, and above all, fear of God. You believe every misfortune, failed crops, dead children, plagues, is God's punishment. And so, you don't rebel, you don't question. You kneel, pray, pay your tithe, endure, and hope for forgiveness. That invisible crown of thorns makes you live a whole life in submission. You don't dare dream of freedom. You don't dare dream of happiness. The only thing you dare to hope for is that when you die, your soul won't be thrown into the fire. Being born a peasant man in the Middle Ages was already a life sentence of hard labor. But if you were born a woman, that sentence was twice as heavy. You weren't just a worker, you were property, a tool, a shadow in a world ruled entirely by men and the church. You grew up in a cramped hut, playing with mud, livestock, and the other village children, but childhood ended quickly. By the age of 12 or 13, before you even understood your own body, your parents would marry you off to a man maybe twice your age, just because he had a few plots of land or a cow. There was no concept of love, no choice. Your marriage was a contract between families, and you, the young bride, were nothing more than merchandise in that exchange. You became a wife, and immediately you were expected to bear children. Not just one, but many as possible. Because children meant labor, workers, and old age insurance. But every pregnancy was a gamble with death. No doctors, no painkillers, no concept of sterilization. You gave birth on a pile of straw, inside a smoke-filled hut. The midwife might be an old woman from the village, with a dull knife or bare hands. Every contraction dragged on for hours. For days you screamed, and the blood could flow until you collapsed. If you survived, your child might not. Infant mortality was terrifyingly high. Many mothers buried their babies the same day they were born, wiping their tears and going straight back to work. And if your husband wasn't satisfied, he would force you into pregnancy again. Motherhood didn't spare you from field work. You still had to plough, sow, harvest, haul water, tend livestock. A baby strapped to your back, a hoe in your hands. The child cried, but you kept working. Back home, more work waited. Stoking the fire, cooking pottage, mending clothes, washing if there was water. No rest. Your day was twice as long as a man's, but no one acknowledged it. They only said, "Women are born to endure. In the eyes of the law, you barely existed. Land, house, animals all belonged to your husband. If he died, property could pass to his male relatives, leaving you and your children homeless. You had no right to join the village council, no right to sign documents, no right to appeal. Even if your husband beat you, people believed it was his right to discipline his wife. Your bones broke, your face bruised, but society called it family order. And if you stood out, if you were too clever, too strong, or simply too beautiful, the greatest danger was being branded a witch. A failed harvest? They blamed you. A child's death? They pointed at you. A cow dying in the field? They said you cursed it. And when that rumor spread, nothing could save you. The punishment for Witches? Fire. They tied you to a wooden stake, piled dry straw around, and lit the flames. The whole village gathered, the priest preaching that this is God's will, while you turned to ash before your husband, your children, your neighbours, your screams carried away by the wind, leaving only the stench of burning flesh seeping into every stone. Of course, not all women faded into darkness. Some widows earned respect through wealth, some nuns held power in convents, and a few noble women even managed estates in their husbands' stead. But these were rare exceptions, and even they lived under the heavy shadow of the church and patriarchy. For you, a common peasant woman, your fate was already written. Married young, bearing many children, labouring until you collapsed, and possibly dying from disease, blood loss, or the purifying fire people called justice. The cruelest part wasn't the beatings or death, it was acceptance. You grew up being told, this is God's will. You didn't dare resist. You didn't dare dream of freedom. You bowed your head, endured, and treated pain as the natural order of life. These invisible chains were heavier than iron. They bound you from your first cry to your last breath, leaving behind an unnamed body buried in damp earth, forgotten forever. In the Middle Ages, law didn't exist as a net of justice to protect people. It was a hammer, brought down only on the heads of the weak. And when that hammer fell, it didn't stop at warning, it left blood, screams, and bodies dangling in the village square. Violence wasn't the exception, it was daily breath. In the home, the husband had the right to beat his wife, the father the duty to whip his children. In the tavern, a wrong look could mean a fist, a dagger drawn, and a body on the floor. On the streets, everyone carried weapons. Short knives, clubs, stones, anything could become a tool of killing. When two groups argued, the whole village could turn into a battlefield. No modern police to intervene, only mobs dealing judgment, and the winner was considered right. The law was written by lords and kings, but carried out by tax collectors and jailers. For peasants, law meant only this: pay, obey, and stay silent. Otherwise, whips and shackles would remind you. A starving thief stealing a loaf of bread could lose his hand. Meanwhile, a noble plundering an entire village's grain walked away untouched. Justice wasn't a balance, it was a sword, and that sword always pointed down. At the centre of the village stood the pillory, or the gallows. Here, law became theatre, and the villagers were unwilling spectators. A thief could be tied to the post, whipped until blood splattered, with everyone watching. An adulterer, especially a woman, might be forced to wear an iron pig's head, paraded through the market in shame. Greater crimes meant hanging, beheading, or the worst of all, burning alive. Smoke rose from the pyre, flames licked upward, screams rang out. The crowd pressed in to watch. Some cried, some laughed, some threw stones at the burning body. Punishment was both justice and a bloody festival. Truth here wasn't found through science, but extracted through torture. The accused might be stretched on the rack until their joints tore apart, or strapped to a red-hot iron chair, or dunked into water until nearly drowned. The innocent could die in agony, just to prove their purity. The guilty might confess anything just to end it sooner. But to the church and the courts, that didn't matter. What mattered was a confession, a finished performance. Many believed God himself would prove innocence. So trials by ordeal were born, walking across fire, holding a red-hot iron bar, or being thrown into a river. If you survived, you were innocent. If you died, you were guilty, and death was justice. Picture a woman tied up, tossed into an icy river. If she floated, they said demons held her up, and she'd be burned alive. If she sank and drowned, they smiled. God has cleared her soul. In both cases, she lost. Witnessing these scenes, the villagers learned the lesson. Don't challenge order. Don't steal. Don't speak against. Don't resist the church. No law books needed. No guards on every corner. Fear was enough to keep everyone in line. Every child grew up seeing it with their own eyes. Anyone who defied power would be flayed, mutilated, or left hanging for the crows. That memory etched deep, becoming a chain of the spirit, binding one generation to the next. In such a world, justice wasn't truth or righteousness. Justice was blood spilled before a crowd, screams echoing in the square, a body dangling as a warning. That's how medieval society maintained order, not with written law, but with terror carved into memory. In this age, death wasn't something distant. It lurked in every meal, every drop of water, every small cut on the skin. You didn't have to be old to face death because few ever lived long enough to grow old. The average peasant might hope to reach 40, if lucky enough to avoid famine, disease, accidents, and war. 40 in modern eyes is only halfway, but in the Middle Ages, it was a miracle. Children died so often that loss became almost ordinary. Half of all children never made it past the age of 5. A mother would cradle her newborn, and just days later, she might be digging a grave. The wailing eventually faded, because the pain had become too familiar. Disease came from everywhere. A cut while harvesting, turning septic, swelling with pus, fever burning high. No antibiotics, no doctors, only prayer. And often, the hand of God never reached out to save you. Plagues swept through villages like a toxic wind. Malaria, typhoid, the plague each wave left bodies piled high. Houses silent, broken only by coughing and the cries of children. Survivors looked around and saw their whole world shrink to a few flickering fires in the night. Famine was a constant collective sentence. One failed harvest, and the whole village starved. They chewed bark, dug roots, even boiled animal hides for food. Children's bellies swelled, eyes sank deep, bodies limp on the ground. The weak fell first. The stronger dragged their corpses into the fields, burying them shallow in the cold earth. No headstone, no hymns, only wind sweeping dust across forgotten bodies. Many didn't die from hunger or sickness, but from blades. A tavern fight, a sudden knife, and life ended in a pool of blood. War was worse. When lords clashed, villages became battlefields. Soldiers marched through, burning homes, stealing food, killing anyone who resisted. Women dragged away, children abandoned. When the soldiers left, only ash and corpses remained. When someone died, the family wrapped the body in old cloth, placed it in a rough wooden coffin or sometimes straight into the ground. The priest muttered a few Latin prayers, words most couldn't understand, but all believed the soul was guided to the afterlife. Peasants had no gravestones. Graves sank into the earth, covered with grass, disappearing. Names faded, remembered only in family whispers, until those voices too were silenced by death. Death didn't end at the grave. Medieval people lived in fear their souls would be hurled into hell. The church painted hell vividly, demons torturing, eternal fire, endless screaming. So even as they lay dying, people trembled in prayer, hoping the priest would arrive in time with holy oil, hoping for one last forgiveness. No one knew what waited beyond death, but all believed in punishment. Some deaths didn't stop with one person, they consumed entire communities. Plague, famine, war, leaving villages abandoned, houses empty, hearths cold, fields overgrown. Travellers passed by darkness and silence, as if life had never existed there. The medieval life cycle was short, closing in shadows. Born on muddy ground, raised in fear and hunger, living through relentless labour, then dying young, quietly, leaving nothing but ash fading into earth. Here, death was never unexpected. It was a companion, walking beside you from your first breath to your last. And if one truth defined the age, it was this: survival was a miracle, and death the only certainty. The picture of medieval life appears as a vicious cycle: poverty, disease, violence, merciless nature, unjust laws, and the spiritual chains of religion. Peasants had no choice but to live in fear and resignation. They worked themselves to exhaustion to pay taxes, prayed for the safety of their souls, and in the end, most left this world before ever reaching old age. Yet, within that darkness, history leaves behind an important lesson. It reminds us that what modern people take for granted, plentiful food, medicine, justice, personal freedom, are all achievements paid for through centuries of suffering by our ancestors. The winter cold, the mouldy bread, the thin bowl of pottage, or the screams from the gallows. All of it carved resilience into the human spirit and pushed people to seek change. Medieval life is proof that humans can endure the harshest conditions, but also a warning. When fear and oppression are used as tools, society breeds only despair and injustice. Looking back at that darkness isn't to be horrified, but to appreciate the present, and to remember that freedom, dignity, and justice never come naturally. They must be defended and preserved every day by every generation. In May of 1729, in a modest house in the city of Stettin, in the Kingdom of Prussia, now Poland, a baby girl was born. No one in that room could have imagined that this frail little child would one day become one of the most powerful women in European history. Her name was Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst, a long formal name that disguised the truth. Her family was not wealthy. Sophie's father was a minor general in the Prussian army, her mother a princess of Holstein, but only from a secondary branch. They had noble titles, but no real power, no fortune. The home Sophie grew up in wasn't marble halls or golden lights, it was plain. A few cold rooms, sparse furniture, rough plastered walls. In 18th century Europe, birth decided everything. A girl of minor nobility like Sophie had two paths: marriage arranged by her parents, or the convent. But from an early age, Sophie was different. She had sharp, piercing eyes that sometimes made adults uneasy, as if she could see through the false glitter of everything around her. She was restless, curious, and stubborn. Instead of being satisfied with embroidery or music lessons like other young ladies, she devoured books. In her father's cramped study, she opened every book she could find. She taught herself French, German, and even Latin, not through formal lessons, but through sheer hunger for knowledge. Her mother, cold and ambitious, scolded Sophie for being too willful. In her eyes, Sophie was nothing more than a pawn to be married into a better family, raising the family's status. But Sophie refused to be a silent doll. She listened, she observed, she remembered, and deep inside, a secret ambition began to grow. Though she held the title of princess, Sophie lived nothing like royalty. Her clothes were old, patched again and again. Meals were not banquets, but soup, cold cuts, and black bread. She knew what it was to shiver through a winter without enough firewood, what it was to feel her stomach ache with hunger. These hardships became lessons. She learned restraint. She learned to read people, to adapt and survive. She realized that in this world, money was not the only power. True power lay in understanding and influencing people. As she grew older, Sophie understood her position clearly. A minor princess, with no lands, no dowry, nothing but her intelligence. But instead of accepting it, she saw opportunity. In her teenage years, she was brought to small gatherings where noble girls were displayed for wealthy families to choose brides. In the glow of candlelight, other girls smiled, curtsied, and followed rules. Sophie did something else. She listened. She remembered every conversation, every secret whispered. She understood. Marriage was not just fate. It was a political chessboard, and she would be the piece that could move itself. At 13, Sophie's mother took her to the Russian court to meet Empress Elizabeth, who was seeking a bride for her nephew, Grand Duke Peter. To many, this idea was absurd. How could a minor princess from Anhalt-Zerbst ever marry into the mighty Russian court? But Sophie didn't see it as a fantasy. The moment she set foot in the palace, she felt it a driving urge. This was her chance to escape smallness, to step into the heart of power. She didn't just learn Russian in a matter of months. She secretly studied Orthodox religious texts, preparing herself for conversion. All in silence, without being told. Once, gravely ill with pneumonia inside the palace, the doctor told her to stay in bed. But Sophie, stubborn as ever, got up and walked across the cold room, forcing herself to breathe. She said, "If I don't stand up myself, I will die." That single sentence would later define Catherine the Great, a woman who never accepted defeat. Yet even with her resolve, Sophie remained under her mother's harsh eye. To her mother, Sophie was just a tool for family ambition. Each time Sophie showed too much will or ambition, her mother scolded her. "You are nothing but an ungrateful girl." But those words only taught Sophie patience, the art of hiding her true will. She learned to mask her smile, to bury her ambition behind calm eyes, a skill that would help her survive the treacherous Russian court. The outside world didn't notice the small princess, but inside Sophie, the fire of power burned quietly. She knew lowly birth was not a life sentence. It was only the opening move in a larger game. And she was ready to move, step by step, until one day she would hold the entire board in her hands. In 1744, at just 15 years old, Sophie von Anhalt-Zerbst left the poor city of Stettin and set out for a foreign land, the Russian Empire. That journey was like a fragile boat cast into a storm, because it would decide whether she would become an empress or vanish without a trace. The carriage rattled along muddy roads, through forests, frozen rivers, poor towns, and wide fields. Along the way, Sophie fell ill again and again from the harsh weather. But instead of breaking down, she clenched her teeth and swore to survive. Behind every cough, every fever, there was a cold determination. She wasn't travelling to fail. Her mother went with her, constantly reminding her that her only duty was to win the favour of Grand Duke Peter, nephew of Empress Elizabeth. Sophie knew well. Her mother saw her as nothing but a pawn, but she herself was holding the chessboard. Elizabeth's palace in Street. Petersburg opened before her like another world, splendid, dazzling, and cold. Walls gilded in gold, crystal chandeliers, polished wooden floors, it all overwhelmed a young princess from a poor land. But Sophie didn't let the grandeur blind her. She observed every gesture of the Russian nobles, listened to how they spoke, memorized the hidden rules. Her curiosity and sharp memory transformed her from an outsider into a quick student of the Russian court within weeks. To be accepted, Sophie had to renounce her Protestant roots and convert to Russian Orthodoxy. That decision meant cutting off a piece of herself, but she didn't hesitate. In the solemn ceremony, she received her new name, Ekaterina Alexeyevna, later to be known to the world as Catherine. As she knelt before the altar, candlelight flickering, many whispered she was too bold, too ambitious for such a young girl. But in that moment, Catherine learned a vital truth. To win power, you must be willing to sacrifice, even if it means sacrificing your old identity. Grand Duke Peter, her destined fiancé, was an eccentric young man. Obsessed with his idol Prussia, he collected toy soldiers and spent hours staging battles, instead of caring about state affairs. His moods were erratic, quick to anger, sometimes cruel, and most of all, he showed little interest in his bride. Catherine quickly recognized his coldness, but she didn't despair. Instead, she patiently built her image. Intelligent, kind, tactful, winning the favor of the empress and the court. If she couldn't win Peter's heart, she would win the trust of everyone around him. In the summer of 1745, at a grand wedding in St. Petersburg, Catherine officially became the wife of Grand Duke Peter. Music thundered, fireworks lit up the sky, guests crowded the halls. But beneath it all, it was a marriage without love, without warmth, only calculation. The wedding night passed in cold silence. Peter, absorbed with his toy soldiers, abandoned his young wife alone in a freezing chamber. The years that followed didn't change that. The palace was luxurious, but Catherine's heart was empty. Being Peter's wife meant living in loneliness and constant danger. Her husband drank heavily, worshipped Prussia more than Russia, lashed out in anger, and often humiliated her in public. Marriage was a gilded cage, and Catherine was trapped inside, under the watchful eyes of the entire court. But in that cage, she didn't weep. She read Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot feeding her mind. She studied Russian politics, history, law. Quietly, she built connections with nobles, officers, intellectuals. As Peter isolated himself, Catherine grew more beloved. Once, when gravely ill with pneumonia, doctors ordered her to stay in bed. But she secretly forced herself to walk the room, warming her lungs with sheer willpower. "If I don't stand up, myself, I will die," she said. That phrase echoed through her life. It was also how she treated her marriage. No happiness, no love, but she would never collapse. In Peter's cold neglect, Catherine found comfort elsewhere. There were fleeting romances, but also relationships that left deeper marks not only in love but in politics. For her, love could not be separated from power. Every man beside her was not just a lover, but a potential ally in a greater game. For more than 10 years, Catherine lived like a shadow in the palace, always calm, always smiling, but inside, carrying the patience of someone waiting for her moment. Each day, she learned more about Russia, about how its people loved, hated, trusted, and betrayed. Meanwhile, Peter drifted further from reality, idolizing Prussia, scorning his own people, drinking himself into ruin, and slowly losing the support of both army and court. Catherine, in contrast, quietly cultivated her network of friends and allies. The contrast sharpened, two parallel lines drawing closer to collision. In 1761, Empress Elizabeth died. On the Russian throne, Grand Duke Peter, the husband Catherine had endured for so many years, became Tsar Peter III. In that moment, Catherine officially became Empress of Russia, but she also realized if she simply sat still, she would soon lose everything. Peter III quickly revealed his madness and foolishness. Obsessed with the Prussian army, he immediately signed peace with Russia's old enemy, enraging his officers. He reversed many of Elizabeth's policies, alienating the nobility. He drank endlessly, neglected the empire, and above all, he scorned Catherine. Inside the palace, whispers spread. Peter is unfit to be Tsar. Catherine is the one with true strength. Those whispers grew into an underground current. Catherine understood the mix of opportunity and danger. If she failed, she would be banished to a convent, or worse, executed. But if she succeeded, she would do the unthinkable, dethrone her own husband to become Russia's sovereign. She began quietly building alliances. Discontented nobles, angry generals, suspicious clergy all gravitated toward Catherine as their anchor. Most importantly, she secured the loyalty of the Imperial Guard, the elite soldiers who had decided the Russian throne more than once. Night after night, Catherine met in secret with allies in dark chambers, voices whispering in the flicker of candlelight. They set the plan, the day, the hour. Not a word leaked, but tension hung over them like a sword. By July 1762, the plot was nearly ready when suddenly, word leaked. Some conspirators were under suspicion, at risk of arrest. If they waited, everything would collapse. Catherine had to act now, no more preparation, no way back. That night, in the Oranienbaum Palace, Catherine barely slept. Thunder rolled outside as if heralding a storm. She wrapped herself in a cloak, hid the tremor in her eyes, and stepped into the dark corridor. Each footstep echoed like a drum of fate. At dawn on the 9th of July, Catherine slipped away to the Izmailovsky Regiment's barracks. She appeared before thousands of soldiers, not in silk gowns, but in a Russian uniform, a cross in her hand. In that instant, a foreign-born woman, once dismissed, transformed into the very symbol of Russia. Her voice rang out, "Brothers, for the motherland, for orthodoxy, for honor, stand with me." The soldiers erupted in cheers. They knelt, kissed her hand, swore loyalty. Swords and bayonets flashed in the morning light. And Catherine, once a neglected wife, now commanded an army. Escorted by the guard, she rode into St. Petersburg. The streets overflowed with people shouting her name. They saw in her a strength Peter never had. From the churches, priests brought out holy icons to bless her. Nobles, officers, common folk all rushed to her side. The palace became the stage for a bloodless revolution. Peter, far away, never suspected his wife, had seized the capital in a single morning. That afternoon, Catherine entered Kazan Cathedral, before the clergy and the army. In a solemn ceremony, she was proclaimed Empress of all Russia, taking the title Catherine II. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky as if scoring a symphony of history. A foreign-born woman, once a poor princess, was now ruler of the largest empire in the world. At Oranienbaum, Peter received the news. Stunned, he could not believe it. A man who was Tsar just days before was now abandoned. He fled, but Catherine's troops captured him. Catherine wanted no bloodshed, but Peter's fate was sealed. Days later, he died mysteriously in captivity, removing the last obstacle. The court whispered of assassination, but history recorded only this. Peter III died alone, and Catherine II became empress without dispute. The new ruler of Russia appeared not through a glittering crown, but through sheer will and iron resolve. Catherine immediately reassured the nobility, promised reforms, and swore to defend orthodoxy and the empire's strength. The crowds, once doubtful of a foreign princess, now roared her name. To them, Catherine was the embodiment of new hope, a queen stronger than any king before her. The summer palace glowed with candlelight. Flags whipped in the wind, fireworks thundered across the sky. Catherine stood on the balcony, gazing down at the ocean of people cheering. In her eyes, there was no more trembling, only the cold steel of someone who had just won a battle for life itself. From poor princess to abandoned wife to daring conspirator leading a coup, Catherine had proven a single truth: power is never given, it must be taken. When Catherine II officially ascended the throne in the summer of 1762, all of Europe was stunned. A foreign woman, with no Romanov blood, had become Empress of Russia, something unheard of. The nobility whispered, the church watched cautiously, and enemies on the borders waited for her to stumble. But Catherine knew, victory by force was only the beginning. The true battle was holding on to power. To survive, she couldn't rely solely on the guard regiments. She had to win over the hearts and minds of nobles, intellectuals, and common people alike. During the long, lonely years with Peter, Catherine had buried herself in books. From Voltaire to Montesquieu, from Diderot to other Enlightenment thinkers, she read, annotated, debated with herself. She saw in them a new path, a Russia not ruled by whips and fear alone, but one that could function through laws, reason, and reform. Soon after taking the throne, Catherine wrote to Voltaire, whom she admired deeply. They began a correspondence that would last for decades. Voltaire called her the Semiramis of the North, while Catherine regarded him as a spiritual teacher. Their letters weren't just pleasantries, they were a place where Catherine tested ideas and revealed her ambition to build a great empire. One of her first major moves was summoning the Legislative Commission in 1767, bringing together over 500 representatives from across the empire, nobles, officials, townsmen, even minority groups. The goal? To create a new code of laws for Russia. She issued the nakaz, her own instructions shaped by the spirit of Montesquieu and Beccaria. Laws must protect people. Torture is inhumane. Justice must be applied equally. In the Winter Palace, beneath gilded ceilings, Catherine read her lofty ideals aloud. The hall fell silent, as if hearing echoes from Paris and Berlin carried into St. Petersburg. Though the commission ultimately failed due to clashing interests, the nakaz achieved something new. It showed that the Empress of Russia wasn't just a usurper. She was a reformer with ideas ahead of her time. Yet, for all her passion for Enlightenment philosophy, Catherine was no dreamer. She knew Russia was too vast, too backward, too divided. So reform always came hand in hand with control. She divided the empire into provinces, placing central officials to oversee them. New schools opened. Medicine began to improve, but at the same time, she strengthened the power of local nobles to keep them loyal to the throne. Catherine understood. To move forward, you had to bargain with reality. At her salons, Catherine often sat with philosophers, scientists, and artists from Europe. Her fingers brushed across books, her eyes lit up as she discussed Rousseau or Diderot. In Paris, London, and Berlin, they called her the Philosopher Queen, a sign that Russia was no longer just a frozen barbaric land, but was entering the orbit of European civilization. But behind that mask, Catherine remained a pragmatic ruler. When peasants revolted, when borders shook with war, she wielded an iron fist to crush them. To her, philosophy was a torch to guide, but power was the sword that defended the throne. Within just a few years of her reign, Catherine had transformed Russia's image to the outside world. No longer seen only as a land of violence and isolation, Russia under her began to resemble a true empire of ideals and intellect. Nobles spoke French, intellectuals debated Voltaire. European-style buildings rose in St. Petersburg. Behind the glitter, suffering peasants remained, resentment simmered, conflicts unsolved. But for Catherine, what mattered was proving that Russia could be both a European empire and an Eastern power, and that she herself was the bridge between those two worlds. From the very first day she sat on the throne, Catherine II understood. A Russian empress could not simply be a manager, she had to be a conqueror. This empire had been built with sword and spear, and only by sword and spear could it stand equal to the great powers of Europe. In the map room of the Winter Palace, Catherine often stood silently before the red-drawn borders. She looked south toward the Black Sea, locked tight by the Ottoman Empire. She looked west toward Poland, weakened, like a wounded beast waiting for predators. Every line on the map, in her eyes, was an opportunity to expand Russia's reach and glory. The first enemy was the Ottoman Empire, the mighty Muslim power that controlled the Black Sea and the gateway to the Mediterranean. In Catherine's view, Russia could not remain forever a prisoner of the North. To become a true power, Russia needed a fleet, warm water ports, and access to the seas year-round. In 1768, the Russo-Turkish War erupted. It wasn't just a border war, it was a clash of civilizations. Catherine unleashed an army of hundreds of thousands, pouring the empire's might into the fight. Fierce battles raged along the Danube, in Crimea, and even across the distant Aegean Sea, where the Russian fleet for the first time burned the Ottoman navy to ashes at the Battle of Chesma. When news of victory reached St. Petersburg, fireworks lit up the sky. Catherine had won not only on the battlefield but also in symbolism. Russia now had its foothold on the Black Sea. After years of fighting, in 1783, Catherine signed the decree annexing Crimea into the Russian Empire. It was a historic triumph. For the first time, Russia had warm water ports year-round, opening the gateway to the Mediterranean. On her inspection tour of Crimea, Catherine rode on horseback through ranks of soldiers, beside Prince Potemkin, her lover, and her right hand in shaping the new lands. That image was likened to a northern goddess of victory, and became a legend etched in Europe's memory. If the Ottomans were the enemy beyond the borders, Poland was the prey right at Russia's side. In the 18th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was collapsing under its own conflicts, feuding nobles, weak governance. To Catherine, it was an opportunity too rich to ignore. At first, she intervened through diplomacy, placing her former lover, Stanisław Poniatowski, on the Polish throne. But when he failed to control the country, Catherine did not hesitate to carve Poland apart with Prussia and Austria. Through 3 partitions, from 1772 to 1795, Poland vanished from the map of Europe. Each time, Russia's territory grew by hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, swallowing fertile lands and millions of new subjects. Europe was stunned. Catherine was not just an empress, she was reshaping the very map of the continent. Foreign envoys recorded. At banquets, Catherine sat beneath golden lights, with a fresh map by her side, her eyes gleaming like blades. When she pointed her finger, a new land turned Russian red. When she smiled, an entire nation disappeared. But expansion did not bring glory alone. It also planted seeds of unrest. The newly annexed lands simmered with resentment, their diverse peoples hard to govern. Endless wars drained the treasury, and peasants bore the weight of new taxes. While nobles revelled in their new estates, the common people sank deeper into misery. And that very misery would soon ignite into flames of rebellion, culminating in the Pugachev uprising, the greatest nightmare of Catherine's reign. If the throne made Catherine the mother of Russia, then in her private life, she was always a woman longing for love and companionship. From the years of neglect under Peter, Catherine had learned to find joy and comfort in the arms of other men. And when she became empress, that did not end. In fact, it became an essential part of her life. Inside the gilded palace, after long, exhausting meetings with courtiers, Catherine would often retreat to her private chambers, where romances began and ended like short chapters in an endless novel. As Grand Duchess, Catherine had an affair with Sergei Saltykov, a young and handsome noble. Many historians believe her first son, Prince Paul, may have been the result of this love, not of Peter. Whatever the truth, Catherine had found in Saltykov what Peter never gave her: attention and the feeling of being cherished. After that came other affairs, sometimes fleeting, sometimes consuming. For Catherine, love was both a need and a political tool. Every man who entered her life brought not only pleasure, but the possibility of becoming an ally, or at the very least, a bridge to power within the court. Among those names, none mattered more than Grigory Potemkin. He was a brilliant general, a passionate lover, and above all, her right hand in building the empire. When Catherine and Potemkin were together, it wasn't just romance, it was the fusion of passion and power. Potemkin helped her conquer Crimea, build new cities, and craft the image of a mighty empire. Some say they even had a secret marriage, not on paper, but in their hearts. Even after their love cooled, Potemkin remained her soulmate. Catherine allowed him to bring younger lovers into her circle, but the bond of trust and loyalty between them never broke. History rarely sees a pair that was both lovers and political partners on such a grand scale. Catherine had many lovers, a number that still stirs debate among historians and scandalized Europe in her time. Sergei Saltykov, Grigory Orlov, Potemkin, Zubov, each name was a story. Some lasted months, others years. For many, this was proof of her excess. But for Catherine, it was simply her right to live as a free human being. In a society where royal men took dozens of mistresses, Catherine defied convention by living true to her own desires. Of course, gossip followed. In Paris, satirical papers called her the Northern Messalina, comparing her to the infamous Roman empress. In London, tabloids spun out wild, grotesque fantasies about her private life. Yet Catherine held her head high. She ruled Russia, and no one had the right to dictate her personal choices. Amidst her affairs and state duties, Catherine was still a mother. Her son Paul grew up in the suffocating atmosphere of court, always kept at a distance from her. Catherine feared his unstable temperament and refused to give him power too soon. Their bond was cold, strained, filled with suspicion. Instead, Catherine poured affection into her illegitimate children and her grandchildren. In letters to Potemkin, she once wrote, "I love them as I love what remains of my own humanity." Perhaps amidst the ocean of power and schemes, those children were the only place where she found tenderness. Yet despite her many lovers, Catherine often felt lonely. On long nights in the Winter Palace, when the candles burned out, she would sit alone at her desk, writing letters to Voltaire, to Diderot, or scribbling diary lines about her fatigue and fears. An empress could command millions of subjects, order armies, redraw the map of Europe. But when night fell, she was still just a woman, yearning to be loved, sometimes frightened by her own shadow. The world remembers Catherine not only for her military campaigns or political reforms, but for a personal life full of legend. Some admired her as a symbol of freedom, others despised her as a libertine. But one truth cannot be denied. Catherine lived authentically. In an age when women were expected to stay silent, she dared to love, to desire, to turn her private life into part of her power. For Catherine, even love was a battlefield, and on that battlefield, she never accepted defeat. Amid Catherine's dazzling victories in Crimea and the lavish feasts of the Winter Palace, a shadow was quietly spreading beneath the surface of her empire, the discontent of millions of serfs. Russia was vast, but most of its people lived bound like slaves. They toiled endlessly on the estates of nobles, endured the lash, paid crushing taxes, and had no escape. Meanwhile, the nobility grew ever richer, showered with privileges Catherine herself granted to secure their loyalty. That tension was like a parched field just waiting for a single spark to ignite. The spark came in 1773, bearing the name Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack cavalryman who claimed to be Peter III, still alive, returned to seize the throne and liberate the peasants. Rumours spread like wildfire. The true Tsar has returned and he stands with us. Peasants, seething with hatred for the nobles and the state, rallied to Pugachev's banner. From the Volga region, the rebellion swelled into a storm, sweeping through villages, smashing prisons, torching noble estates. Rebels slaughtered landowners, hanged officials, and set up a people's court, promising to abolish serfdom and divide the land. When news reached St. Petersburg, Catherine was shaken. The empress who had just conquered Crimea and partitioned Poland now faced the truth. Her throne trembled from within. The rebels captured fortresses and threatened to march on Moscow. The court panicked. Nobles locked their mansions, begging the empress for help. The regular army, spread thin on the borders, could not respond in time. Inside the palace, candlelight flickered across Catherine's weary face, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Catherine ordered a full mobilization. Battle-hardened generals were dispatched to crush the uprising. Ferocious clashes erupted across the Volga steppe, where tens of thousands of peasants armed with scythes, clubs, and crude muskets faced Russia's disciplined troops. At first, the rebels triumphed, fueled by sheer numbers and burning rage. They torched Kazan, turning the city into an inferno. But gradually, the empire's superior weapons and discipline turned the tide. By late 1774, Pugachev's forces were encircled. The Cossack leader was betrayed by his own men and handed over to the authorities. In Moscow, Pugachev was executed before a massive crowd. His head was severed, his body quartered, a grotesque spectacle meant to send a message. Any who defied the throne would die horribly. The Pugachev rebellion became one of the greatest upheavals of Catherine's reign, leaving hundreds of thousands dead, villages in ruins, and a haunting scar on the empire. It exposed a brutal paradox. Catherine admired Voltaire and Montesquieu, dreamed of liberty and rule of law, but in practice, she was forced to rely on the whip to keep order. After the revolt, Catherine abandoned many plans to reform serfdom. She tightened control, granted nobles even greater privileges. The Enlightenment ideals she once championed gave way to the harsh realities of power. From Paris, Voltaire wrote letters praising Catherine as a strong monarch. Yet even he never knew the full truth. That inside Catherine's heart, cracks had formed. She realized she could not be both the philosopher queen and the ruler of a vast empire built on serfdom. The throne remained firm, the empire kept expanding, but beneath it all, the cries of the people still echoed. Catherine could silence Pugachev's flames, but she could never extinguish the smouldering fire of injustice. At 60, Catherine II still carried herself with regal authority. Sharp eyes, a commanding voice, a powerful stride. Yet behind the powder and paint, her body was wearing down. Decades on the throne had taken their toll. Heart pains and obesity made it harder and harder for her to move. Still, Catherine never stopped working. Every day she received officials, signed decrees, read reports, and penned letters to Europe's philosophers. She even drafted plans to push Russia's borders further still toward the Balkans and Constantinople. In Catherine's mind, empire had no finish line. Her relationship with her son Paul remained a wound that never healed. Catherine saw him as weak, hot-tempered, and unfit to rule. In her heart, she dreamed of bypassing him and passing the crown to her grandson Alexander, whom she had raised from childhood. That distrust burned Paul with resentment. In the palace, the air between them was always cold. When Catherine entered a room, Paul barely bowed. When Paul spoke, she cut him off, mocking him. The fracture between mother and son would have consequences once she was gone. In November 1796, after a long morning of work, Catherine suddenly collapsed in her private chambers. Servants rushed in to find her unconscious on the cold stone floor. They lifted her to her bed, summoned physicians, but all efforts failed. 2 days later, Catherine drew her final breath at 67. The Winter Palace echoed, with grief, but also with whispers. Her death was not just the passing of an empress, it was the opening of an uncertain era under Paul. Her body lay in state in the Winter Palace, surrounded by flickering candles and guarded by thousands of soldiers. Crowds from across Russia poured into St. Petersburg to bid farewell. For hours, they stood in the freezing cold to glimpse, one last time, the face of the woman who had ruled them for more than 3 decades. When her coffin was carried into the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, cannons thundered across the grey sky. The moment closed a chapter that had begun with a poor princess named Sophie of Stettin, and ended with Catherine the Great of all Russia. Over 34 years on the throne, Catherine transformed Russia from a half-feudal backwater into a European power. She expanded the empire by millions of square kilometers, from the Black Sea to Poland. Russian fleets sailed into the Mediterranean. On the world stage, Russia was no longer an outsider. It was a power that shaped Europe itself. At home, Catherine infused Enlightenment spirit into her empire, founding schools, libraries, fostering art and science. Cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow took on a European elegance. Under her, Russian culture began to find its own voice, no longer just imitating the West, yet her legacy is full of contradictions. She praised liberty, but entrenched serfdom. She wrote about human rights, yet crushed Pugachev's rebellion in blood. To Voltaire, she was the philosopher queen. To Europe's gossips, the queen rest, Messalina of the North. Whether praised or condemned, Catherine left an immortal image. A woman who dared defy every convention, who seized and held power in a man's world, and who turned personal ambition into the destiny of an empire. She is remembered not just through decrees or victories, but through her proud gaze, her cold smile, and the epic tale of a foreign princess who climbed the throne of Russia. The summer of 1994, the jungles of Chiapas, Mexico, still hummed with the suffocating breath of the rainy season. Beneath the thick green canopy and the endless drone of cicadas, a group of archaeologists stepped into the ancient complex of Palenque, the sacred city of the Maya. Behind moss-covered stone walls, they believed secrets still lay hidden. And then, a discovery changed the way the world looked at this civilization. Inside the pyramid of the Temple of the Cross, archaeologists uncovered a narrow passage, sealed for thousands of years. Dust fell in clumps as hammers struck the wall. The stench of mold, rotting earth, and ashes poured from the cracks, as though centuries of history itself were sighing. When the last stones were removed, a steep, dark passage appeared. They lit torches and stepped down, each stair echoing beneath their feet. A sudden chill washed over their skin, so different from the suffocating heat outside. At the end stood a massive stone door, waiting to be opened. The slab creaked open, torchlight spilled into the chamber, and silence fell. At the centre lay a colossal stone sarcophagus, but what left them breathless was not the coffin, it was the sight that drenched the entire chamber. Everything was painted red. Cinnabar dust, mercury sulfide coated the walls, the floor, the sarcophagus itself. Under firelight, it shimmered like blood, as though the entire room had been submerged in a crimson sea. The atmosphere was both sacred and terrifying. Some archaeologists stepped back, hearts pounding, sensing they hadn't just opened a tomb, they had intruded upon a cosmic ritual. The sarcophagus lid slid aside. Inside, the skeleton of a woman lay on her back, bones still intact, stained deep red. Her face was covered with a glittering green jade mask. Fragments of jade beads and seashell ornaments still clung to her chest. She was not a warrior, not a king, as some might have hoped. She was a woman buried with honors equal to Maya rulers. The room fell silent. One archaeologist whispered, "Who was she to be revered this way?" From that very moment, the press and scholars gave her a name, Reina Roja, the Red Queen. No one knew her real name, her bloodline, or her exact role in Palenque's dynasty. But the cinnabar, the jade mask, the grandeur of her burial revealed one truth. She was more than a woman. She was a sacred, political, almost divine figure. The title Red Queen quickly left the academic world and became legend. It conjured the image of a woman cloaked in mystery and power, at once revered, at once feared. The tomb of the Red Queen remains one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the Maya world in the 20th century. It proved that women could hold central authority in Maya society, not merely silent figures in the royal court, but rulers, or even supreme priestesses. And the cinnabar, so toxic that modern archaeologists needed protective masks, spoke of the Mayas' deep belief in sacrifice and rebirth. She was buried in red, the color of blood, the sun, of life itself, as if she had not died, but crossed into an eternal form of existence. When the stone door was pried open, a cloud of cinnabar dust burst forth like a flame suppressed for thousands of years. That red powder didn't just cover the sarcophagus, it clung to every wall, every stone, seeping deep into the very bones. In the torchlight, the red shimmered like freshly spilled blood. The chamber no longer felt like a tomb, it felt like a colossal altar. The archaeologist shivered for a moment. This wasn't random color, but a message the Maya intended for the future. In Maya culture, blood wasn't just what sustained the body, it was the very substance that linked humans to the gods. Every act of sacrifice, from a drop pricked from a finger to the tearing of a human heart, was seen as nourishment for the universe. Red, therefore, symbolized eternal life. By covering the Red Queen's entire body in cinnabar, the Maya transformed her into a living symbol of immortality. She did not simply die, she was reborn in the cosmic blood of the universe. The Maya watched the sun rise each morning in the east, glowing red on the horizon, as if reborn after the long night. Red was tied to the cycles of day and night, life and death, destruction and renewal. The Red Queen, buried in that color, became the embodiment of the eternal sunrise. Her spirit fused with the rhythms of the cosmos, never fading, forever rising with each dawn. But red was not only blood, it was also a gateway to the other world. For the Maya, death was not the end, but a journey into Xibalba, the deep underworld. To cross that threshold, the soul had to be marked in red, so the gods could recognize it and lead the way. The blood-red chamber was a passage, turning the queen into an eternal traveler, cloaked in the color of sacrifice, stepping into her immortal journey. In Maya society, red was also bound to royal power and the strength of women. If kings were linked to jade green, the color of the sky, then red belonged to those tied to fertility, rebirth, and sustenance. The Red Queen was not just a ruler, but a symbolic mother of Palenque itself. Enveloped in red, she was marked as queen, priestess, and the mother of rebirth for the sacred city. Red was the color of blood, of the sun, of rebirth, and of power. But for Palenque, it carried a message across time. By saturating the entire chamber in toxic cinnabar, the Maya not only created a sacred ritual, but also, without knowing it, crafted a preservation cocoon that kept her remains intact for 1,000 years. The death of the Red Queen, sealed in red, became a metaphysical masterpiece, a message carried forward to the modern world, that in Maya civilization, life and death were not opposites, but intertwined, forming an eternal circle without end. When the sarcophagus lid was lifted, the torchlight revealed a face covered by a mask of green jade. Each fragment of jade had been carefully cut and fitted to shape the features of a human face. The eyes were white seashells, with pupils of gleaming black obsidian. The lips were slightly parted, as if the figure in the tomb were still whispering. In Maya belief, green jade was the color of the sky and of life itself. A jade mask did more than cover the face, it allowed the dead to step into the other world with an eternal form. The Red Queen, through this, was no longer mere flesh, but an everlasting spirit. Beside the skeleton, archaeologists uncovered strands of jade beads, necklaces of seashells, and fragments of precious stone ornaments. They weren't dazzling like Egyptian gold, but in Maya culture, jade and shells carried far greater sacred weight than any metal. Jade symbolized life and eternity. Shells embodied the sea, the primordial source of the universe. Buried together, they transformed the queen into a bridge between sky, earth, and ocean. Scattered across the chamber lay ceramic vessels, small bowls, and decorated plates. Some still bore traces of ash, proof they once held food or liquid offerings. The Maya believed the dead continued their journey in the afterlife, and these items were spiritual provisions for that path. On the pottery surfaces, figures of rituals, dances, and gods were painted both as gifts and as prayers in images, meant to escort her soul safely through the perilous road to Xibalba. Beyond the treasures, the excavation revealed the bones of 2 young individuals inside the tomb. They may have been attendants or sacrifices destined to serve the queen in the other world. Their bodies, curled in the corners of the chamber, were also coated in cinnabar red. The scene was chilling and brutal. The immortality of one woman had been purchased with the lives of others. It reflected the Maya conviction that death was never individual, but a collective rite where blood and souls merged into the eternal being of the revered. From the jade mask, the bead strands, the shells, the ceramic offerings, to the sacrificed bones, all of it came together as a wordless scripture. It proclaimed that the Red Queen was not merely a person, but a cosmic symbol. She entered death with an immortal face, carrying the sea and the sky, served by other spirits, and stepping forward, cloaked in an endless red of blood. When the stone door closed after the excavation, what haunted the archaeologists wasn't just the red dust or the jade face of eternity. It was the unanswered question. Who was this woman? No inscribed stele, no written record, only a crimson skeleton and her grave goods. For decades, archaeologists have woven countless theories to unravel the mystery. The first and most famous theory: she was Tsakbu Ajar, wife of King Pakal the Great, the most legendary ruler of Palenque, who reigned for nearly 70 years. The argument: the Red Queen was buried in a great pyramid, only steps away from Pakal's tomb. That proximity suggests a direct link to the king. Her jewellery and funerary rites matched royal standards, honours that could belong to no one but a queen. If true, the Red Queen was the most powerful woman of 7th century Palenque, the queen who stood beside Pakal during its golden age. But not all agree. Some scholars point out that her tomb lacks explicit royal insignia. Instead, many artifacts carry religious symbolism. That has led to another idea. The Red Queen may have been a high priestess, someone whose role was to connect directly with the gods. If so, burying her in blood-red cinnabar wasn't just about royal honour. It was about preserving the supernatural energy of a priestess. Another hypothesis suggests she may have been Ix Tsakbu Ajar, the mother or grandmother of a successor king. Her remains show she died around 60 years old, an unusually long life for the Maya. A woman who lived so long and was buried with such ceremony may have been the matriarch of a dynasty. In Maya culture, bloodlines carried sacred weight. A mother, even without ruling herself, could be exalted as the very origin of divine lineage. DNA testing was carried out on her bones and compared with those of Pakal. The results showed no direct blood relation. She was not his mother or sister. That increased the likelihood that she was his wife rather than kin. Still, DNA alone could not offer absolute certainty, and the silence of surviving Maya texts keeps her identity shrouded like the mist of the Chiapas jungle. Perhaps the real question isn't who she was, but why the Maya wanted her to become a symbol. By burying her in a sea of red, they erased her personal name, transforming her into an idea, the queen, the mother, the bridge between humans and the divine. The Red Queen wasn't just a woman, she was a ritual made flesh, a living emblem of power, blood, and immortality. More than 20 years after the discovery, Mexico's museums still display her jade mask and grave offerings. Visitors stop, peer into the obsidian eyes, and whisper to themselves, who was this woman? Maybe that mystery is the heart of the story. The Red Queen lives not only in the past, but in our imagination where history and myth blur into one. On the surviving stele and reliefs at Palenque, Tikal, Copan, and Yaxchilan, we don't see only images of kings' mighty warriors, but also women. They appear in postures of ritual, participating in bloodletting ceremonies, or standing side by side with kings during sacred offerings. The Red Queen, with her crimson tomb, is just one fragment of a larger picture. Maya women could hold central roles in ritual, politics, and religion. The Maya saw royal blood as sacred, and if the king was the son of the gods, then the mother was the gateway through which the divine entered the world. Royal women were not only childbearers but also the living guarantee of a dynasty's legitimacy. A queen buried on par with a king like the Red Queen is proof of that importance. She was not simply a wife, but the guardian of Palenque's sacred bloodline. Maya women could also become priestesses, the intermediaries between humans and the heavens. They performed bloodletting rituals, piercing tongues or ears with thorns to offer blood to the gods. In Yaxchilan carvings, Queen Lady Zoc is depicted pulling a thorned rope through her tongue, blood dripping onto bark paper, then burned so the smoke could carry messages skyward. That act was not only religious, it was political. Through such rituals, the priestess confirmed the king's legitimacy and showed that power did not belong to men alone. In Maya history, there were women who directly ruled, like Ixcabal, recorded as the supreme warrior of Karnal at El Peru Waka. She was not only a queen consort but also a military leader, commanding campaigns like a king. Her existence shows that, when needed, women could ascend the throne not as shadows behind their husbands, but as true rulers in their own right. Placed within this larger picture, the Red Queen is no longer alone. Her cinnabar-covered tomb was not only to honor an individual, but to remind us of tradition. Maya women could embody the soul of a dynasty. Whether as Pakal's wife, the mother of a king, or a high priestess, she represented feminine power, a force not wielding swords, but tied to blood, ritual, fertility, and legitimacy. Today, when researchers look at the Red Queen's tomb, they see more than a crimson-stained skeleton. They see the presence of all Maya women, those who shaped this civilization in silent but powerful ways. She has become a symbol reminding us that, in the Maya world, women did not only stand at the margins many times, they stood at the very center of belief and power. Deep in the Chiapas jungle, Palenque rises like a stone city swallowed by time. Moss-covered stairways, temples breaking through the dense canopy, reaching high as if to touch the sky. The Maya did not build palaces just to live in, they built them to speak with the gods. Among these ruins, the temple where the Red Queen rests, known as the Temple of the Holy Cross, is not just architecture, but a ritual in stone. Every stair, every hallway, every carving carries sacred meaning, turning the tomb into a cosmic gate, leading her soul into the universe. The Maya believed in the sacred mountain Vitz, home of the gods and the destination of the soul after death. The pyramids of Palenque were built to mirror that mountain. When the Red Queen's coffin was placed within the temple, she was not merely buried, she was set in the heart of the sacred world, ready to pass through the doorway to the other side. The steep stairways climbing toward the temple's summit embodied the journey itself. Harsh, perilous, but ultimately bringing humans closer to the divine. The funeral of the Red Queen was surely no silent event. Archaeologists imagine the scene, a long procession with drums, flutes, and chants as the sun set in a crimson glow. Her body, covered in cinnabar and masked in jade, lay upon a carved wooden litter carried slowly across the stone plaza. The people knelt, nobles scattered flowers, priests cut themselves to offer blood to the gods. Every step was part of a rebirth ritual, guiding the queen from the world of the living into the realm of the divine. On temple walls and stone columns, reliefs depict kings and queens performing bloodletting, calling, rain, or opening portals for the serpent god to emerge from the void. These were not just religious images, but declarations of power. Maya rulers were not only kings, they were chosen by the gods. In this context, the Red Queen being placed in her own temple, with her body drenched in red, reveals that she too carried divine authority, equal to that of male kings. What is unique about Maya architecture is this: temples are never silent. Even after thousands of years, even when the jungle swallowed them, the stones still whisper. The steep walls, vaulted roofs, dark corridors, they make anyone entering feel not just like a witness to ritual, but part of it. The Red Queen's tomb is therefore not just a burial place, but a cosmic stage where death was performed as an eternal ritual for the whole community. If in the West, tombs are cold blocks of stone, for the Maya, every tomb was a living religious symbol. Architecture, ritual, and death fused as one. Palenque, with its pyramids and corridors, is a stone book telling the story of life, death, and rebirth. And the Red Queen, placed at the center of that book, became a special chapter not written in words, but in the blazing red of blood and stone. From that stone chamber dusted in cinnabar, the Red Queen has gone far beyond the role of an archaeological skeleton. She has become a timeless symbol, making everyone who steps into Palenque feel as though they are touching the breath of a civilization still alive. The scientists carried away fragments of jade masks, strings of beads, but what they truly carried was the gaze of a woman, one who crossed the boundary between life and death to become legend. The image of the Red Queen changed how the modern world sees Maya women. Once, many assumed this society was ruled solely by men, but the blazing red tomb proves otherwise. Women could stand at the center of political and religious power. The Red Queen, though her true name is lost, carries a greater truth. Maya women could be queens, priestesses, ritual warriors. She showed that power lay not only in swords or thrones, but in the ability to give birth, to rebirth, and to legitimize an entire dynasty. The red that covered her chamber didn't just make archaeologists shiver. It planted into the modern imagination an image of eternal rebirth. She died, but was wrapped in blood and sunlight. She turned to dust, yet was painted in the color of immortality. Today, when her jade mask is displayed in museums, viewers don't just see an artifact, they see eyes staring back across the millennia. The eyes of a spirit that never vanished, only changed form. The discovery of the Red Queen transformed Palenque from mere ruins into a living story. Visitors climb the stairways, look up at the temples, and imagine the funeral procession, flowers strewn, drums beating, incense smoke curling to the heavens. In that moment, the jungle falls silent, and time seems to fold back on itself, bridging two worlds. Because of her, Palenque is no longer a hushed ruin, but a collective memory that allows us to feel connected to distant ancestors. The legacy of the Red Queen also reflects the contradictions of Maya civilization, a world both radiant and ruthless, both honoring life and drowning in blood sacrifice. Her crimson tomb is not just glory, it is also the price paid with the lives of attendants buried alongside her. This tension makes her story all the more compelling. It reminds us that no civilization is purely light. It always carries shadows. And it is those shadows that give history its depth and complexity. Today, every new DNA test, every artifact analysis sparks yet another theory about her identity. But perhaps the mystery itself is part of her legacy. If one day we were to know with certainty that she was Pakal's wife or a high priestess, the legend might lose some of its glow. By hiding her true name, the Maya left a space for imagination. And in that space, the Red Queen is no longer just a woman. She is the very symbol of a vanished civilization. The crimson tomb at the heart of Palenque doesn't just reveal the secret of one woman, it illuminates an entire civilization. The Red Queen reminds us that history wasn't written only by kings with swords, but also by the women behind the throne, in the rituals, and in the sacred bloodline of dynasties. The red that covered the chamber wasn't just the color of death, it was the color of life, of sunrise, of eternal rebirth. She was buried as a ritual, transformed into an immortal symbol of the bond between humanity and the cosmos. And it is her mystery, the absence of a name, the lack of inscriptions, that makes her eternal in our imagination. Anyone can see in her the reflection of power, of faith, of injustice, and of hope. From the Red Queen, the lesson left to us is clear. Every civilization is built with both light and shadow. The greatness of the Maya was adorned with art, architecture, and astronomy, but it was also drenched in sacrifice and oppression. To recognize both sides is to understand that progress is never a simple gift, but always paid for with a price. And so, the Red Queen still lives not only in museums or the jungles of Mexico, but in humanity's shared memory, as a reminder that the power of symbols can outlast even the names of those who bore them.